Tonight, we drift back to a world remarkably different from our own, a quiet, slower world resting 200 years in the past. It is a world just teetering on the cusp of profound change, yet still deeply rooted in traditions that had held sway for centuries. Imagine, if you will, the gentle hush of an evening, long before the insistent hum of electricity or the constant gleam of screens. Find truly comfortable a soft place, perhaps nestled amongst your pillows, dimming the lights until only a soft glow remains, allowing your mind to softly unwind. Tonight we will explore what it truly meant to be rich in such a time, not just the possessions, but the very texture of daily life, the sensations, the rhythms, and the expectations that shaped it. If you find gentle comfort in these words tonight, perhaps a soft thumb tap on the like button or a gentle subscription will help us continue these quiet journeys into the past. The early 19th century, roughly the period between 1800 and 1830, was a fascinating, almost dreamlike era, poised gracefully between the fading echoes of the Enlightenment and the nascent whispers of the Industrial Revolution. It was a time when the very fabric of society felt more tangible, more defined, less fluid than it does today. Imagine, for a moment, the world illuminated predominantly by the soft, flickering light of candles and oil lamps, casting long, dancing shadows upon paneled walls and velvet drapes. The loudest sounds often came from nature herself, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the rhythmic clopping of hooves on cobbled streets, or the creak of a carriage wheel. The pervasive mechanical hum that defines our modern soundscape simply did not exist. Life, in its essence, unfolded at a far more deliberate pace, a pace dictated by the sun's gentle cycle, the seasonal changes, and the sheer effort required for even the simplest of tasks. Society, during these early decades of the 19th century, was structured with an almost architectural rigidity, a grand, intricate edifice built upon centuries of tradition and inherited status. While the American and French revolutions had stirred the waters of political thought, challenging the absolute power of monarchs and the explicit divine right of kings, their deeper implications for the daily lives and social mobility of most people had not yet fully materialized. The concept of an inherited aristocracy, of a landed gentry, still held immense sway, particularly across Europe, and its influence rippled through the burgeoning economies of the newly independent United States. Wealth was not merely about accumulation, it was profoundly intertwined with lineage, with the ownership of vast estates, with the control of agricultural lands that produced the very sustenance of the nation, and with the political power that such holdings automatically conferred. For the vast majority of people, life was characterized by a ceaseless, often arduous connection to the land and to manual labor. The rhythm of the seasons dictated their work, from the planting of spring to the harvest of autumn, a cycle that felt eternal and unchanging. Peasants, farmers, laborers, and domestic servants formed the broad base of this societal pyramid, their lives often defined by subsistence, by hard work, and by a dependence on those above them for employment, protection, and the bare necessities of existence. Their homes were humble, their possessions few, and their horizons often limited to their village or their immediate vicinity. The world beyond was largely an abstract concept, gleaned from the occasional traveler, the rare newspaper, or the sermons of the local priest. In stark contrast, at the very apex of this societal structure stood the wealthy. Their fortunes were not merely measured in currency, though vast sums certainly played their part, but in acres of prime land, in the number of tenants bound to their estates, in the prestige of their family name, and in the sheer scale of their domestic establishments. A wealthy household was not just a home, it was a small, self-contained economy, an intricate machine requiring dozens, sometimes hundreds, of hands to maintain its smooth operation. Imagine the sheer logistics, the scores of cooks, scullery maids, footmen, valets, chambermaids, grooms, gardeners, coachmen, and stable hands, all living and working within the orbit of the wealthy family, their lives intricately woven into the daily routines of their employers. Technology, as we understand it today, was in its infancy. The very notion of convenience was radically different. There were no instantaneous communications. Letters, the primary form of long-distance interaction, took days, weeks, or even months to reach their recipients, carried by riders, by stagecoaches, or by sailing ships across vast oceans. This meant that news traveled slowly, and world events often unfurled with a deliberate, almost stately grandeur, without the breathless immediacy to which we are so accustomed. Information was a precious commodity, disseminated through word of mouth, publicly posted notices, or the slowly circulating newspapers, often only accessible to the educated elite. Travel was a laborious undertaking, measured not in hours, but in days and weeks. Journeys were often arduous, fraught with discomfort, and sometimes truly perilous. The roads themselves, particularly outside of major cities, were often unpaved, prone to mud in the rain and dust in the dry, making smooth travel a rare luxury. Carriages, though beautifully appointed for the wealthy, still rattled and jolted, and the constant need to change horses and drivers added significant time to any lengthy trip. This limited the range of most individuals, even the wealthy, and fostered a deep sense of localism, a focus on one's immediate surroundings and the communities within easy reach. The concept of a globalized world was a distant, barely imaginable prospect, a notion reserved for a handful of merchants, explorers, and diplomats. The vast gulf between the rich and the poor was often not just economic, but almost spatial, etched into the very landscape. In cities, the wealthy resided in grand townhouses, their quiet, tree-lined streets a world away from the bustling, often overcrowded, and unsanitary alleyways where the working classes lived. In the countryside, the manor house or great estate stood as a commanding presence, its vast, manicured grounds separating it from the scattered cottages of tenants and laborers. This physical separation reinforced the social distinctions, creating distinct worlds that rarely intersected outside of a hierarchical employer-employee relationship. This early 19th century world was, in many ways, a tapestry woven with patience and tradition. It was a world that moved to the rhythm of nature and human effort, where sounds were natural, light was soft, and the sense of time stretched out with a certain expansive grace. Understanding the contours of this quieter, slower world, with its rigid social strata and nascent technology, is essential to truly grasping the unique privileges and responsibilities, the intricate routines and subtle burdens, that define the lives of the wealthy during this intriguing chapter of history. It was a world that breathed differently, where the air itself seemed to hum with a different frequency, a world we will gently explore together over the coming nights. Tonight, we drift back to a time when wealth wore a very different cloak, a time when its very fabric was woven with threads of land and lineage. As you settle in, perhaps dimming the lights just a touch, allowing your body to soften into the comfort of your surroundings, imagine with me the world of the truly affluent, bathed in the soft glow of a forgotten era. If, by the end of our gentle journey, you found a moment of serene contentment, a quiet drift towards slumber, then perhaps you might consider offering a whisper of support with a like or a soft subscription. For now, let us simply journey. We have begun our quiet exploration of wealth in a bygone age, and now, as our journey continues, let us turn our serene gaze towards the very zenith of prosperity, the aristocratic elite. These were the hereditary lords and ladies, whose existence was inextricably tied to vast tracts of land and titles whispered down through generations, echoing with centuries of history. Their wealth was not merely accumulated through enterprise or innovation in the bustling new factories that were just beginning to hum in the distance. No, their riches ran deeper, flowing like ancient rivers through the very bedrock of their inheritance. Picture, if you will, a grand estate, perhaps nestled in the verdant heart of England or among the rolling vineyards of France. This was not just a house, however magnificent, it was a universe unto itself. The big house, as it was often called, might boast 50, 60, even 100 rooms, each serving a specific, often elaborate, purpose. Consider the grand drawing rooms, with their soaring ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork, where gentle light filtered through tall sash windows, illuminating gilded mirrors and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. These were spaces designed not for mere living, but for stately presentation, for the quiet display of inherited power and refined taste. The furniture itself would have been a testament to wealth and craftsmanship. Imagine sprawling mahogany dining tables, polished to a mirror sheen, capable of seating 20 or more guests with ease. Each chair, perhaps upholstered in silk or velvet, would have been a masterpiece of carving and construction. In the libraries, towering shelves, often reaching to the ceiling, would have held thousands of leather-bound volumes, collected not just for knowledge, but as cherished symbols of intellectual pursuit and cultivated leisure. The scent of old paper and wood polish would have mingled in the air, a quiet perfume of erudition. Beyond the immediate confines of the grand house stretched acres upon acres of land, the true source of their enduring influence. A duke or an earl might own tens of thousands of acres, sometimes even hundreds of thousands. This land was not idle, it was a complex economic engine, sustaining not only the aristocratic family but entire communities. There would have been sprawling arable fields, producing grains for bread and beer, and vast pastures where herds of cattle and flocks of sheep grazed, providing meat, wool, and dairy. Timber forests would have supplied wood for building and fuel. Within these estates, small villages often dotted the landscape, where tenant farmers and their families lived and worked, their lives intrinsically linked to the rhythms of the land and the landlord's benevolence, or lack thereof. The streams of income for these families were steady and substantial. Rents from their tenant farmers formed a significant portion, a predictable flow of money derived from the productive use of their ancestral lands. Beyond this, they might have owned mines, quarries, or mills, further diversifying their income and extending their economic reach. The value of their estates was not merely in the annual income generated, but in the sheer capital represented by the land itself, an asset that rarely depreciated and often appreciated over time, securing their wealth for generations yet unborn. Life within these estates was orchestrated by a vast household staff, a hierarchical army of servants ensuring every comfort and managing every detail. For a prominent family, a staff of 50 to 100 individuals was not uncommon. At the apex stood the butler, a figure of quiet authority, overseeing the male staff, the cellars, and the silver. Beneath him, footmen would attend to the family's personal needs, serving meals, delivering messages, and maintaining the appearance of the reception rooms. The housekeeper, often a formidable woman, presided over the female staff, from the legions of housemaids, dusting and polishing every surface, to the laundry maids, painstakingly washing and pressing mountains of linen. The kitchen, a bustling world unto itself, would have been overseen by a highly skilled chef, often French, preparing elaborate multi-course meals using fresh ingredients sourced from the estate's gardens, dairy, and game reserves. Imagine the controlled chaos, the clatter of pots, the sizzle of pan, the rich aromas of roasting meats and simmering sauces wafting through the air, all culminating in beautifully presented dishes served with quiet precision in the grand dining room. Beyond the domestic staff, there were also the outdoor workers. The head gardener, with his teams of under-gardeners, would maintain extensive formal gardens, with their symmetrical flower beds, sculpted hedges, and perhaps even an ornate orangery for tender plants. Gamekeepers would protect the deer and pheasant for hunting, exercising a quiet dominion over the wilder parts of the estate. Stable hands would care for the horses, essential not just for transport but for leisure, for riding through the parks, and for drawing the elegant carriages that were a further symbol of status. The daily routine for an aristocratic lady, while seemingly one of leisure, was often filled with quiet duties. There would be correspondence to attend to, managing her own household accounts, perhaps overseeing charitable endeavors in the local village, or supervising the education of her children through governesses and tutors. Mornings might involve a gentle stroll through the gardens, or quiet hours spent in a private sitting room, engaging in needlework or reading the latest novels and poetry. Afternoons might bring social calls from neighboring gentry, a formal exchange of pleasantries over tea, or a carriage ride into town for specific purchases. For the lord of the manor, his time was often divided between managing his estate, participating in local politics, and engaging in sports such as hunting, shooting, and fishing, which were not just pastimes but important social rituals. His days might involve meetings with his estate manager, inspecting tenant farms, or presiding over local justice as a magistrate. Evenings were the heart of social life, with elaborate multi-course dinners and quiet conversations in drawing rooms, perhaps accompanied by music played on a pianoforte or a game of whist. Travel for these families was a carefully orchestrated affair. Journeys by carriage could be slow and arduous, sometimes taking days to reach a destination. The carriages themselves were often exquisitely crafted, pulled by a team of fine horses, with liveried footmen riding on the back. When venturing further afield, to London for the social season or to a continental spa town, they would typically travel in their own private carriages, accompanied by a retinue of servants, ensuring that the comforts of home were never truly out of reach. The clothing worn by these ladies and gentlemen would have been of the finest quality, hand-stitched from luxurious fabrics. For ladies, delicate silks, fine muslins, and rich velvets, often imported, would have been fashioned into elaborate gowns, corseted to achieve the fashionable silhouette of the era. Intricate embroidery, lace, and ribbons would have added refined detail. Gentlemen would have worn tailored coats of wool or fine broadcloth, waistcoats of silk or brocade, crisp linen shirts, and knee breeches or trousers, all indicative of their gentle standing. The subtle cut, the quality of the cloth, the quiet gleam of a gold watch chain or a signet ring, would all have conveyed a clear message of understated, yet undeniable, wealth. This was a world steeped in tradition, where status was inherited and not easily gained. The aristocratic elite, with their ancient titles and vast estates, represented a pinnacle of wealth that was deeply rooted, enduring, and largely unchallenged. Their lives, while grand and seemingly effortless, were also bound by societal expectations and the quiet responsibilities of their elevated position. It was an existence of quiet privilege and deep-seated certainty, a serene landscape of inherited abundance, now gently receding into the soft mists of time, allowing our own thoughts to drift, to settle, and to simply be. We continue our gentle journey into a past where the textures of wealth were woven quite differently than they are today. We have considered the grand houses and their inner workings, the outward displays of affluence. Now, our gaze softly turns to the very earth beneath those grand estates, to the foundational substance that truly anchored a family standing 2 centuries ago, land. Land was not merely property then, not simply a commodity to be bought and sold with swift transactions. It was, in a very profound and deeply embedded sense, the bedrock of everything. It signified permanence, a tangible manifestation of a family's reach, extending not just across fields and forests, but across generations. To own land, particularly vast tracts of it, was to hold a form of power that resonated through every layer of society, a power perhaps difficult for us to fully grasp in our modern world, where wealth often resides in more abstract forms, in digital accounts and intellectual property. Imagine, if you will, the gentle undulations of a sprawling estate, perhaps stretching for miles in every direction. This was not just a scenic view from a manor house window. Each acre held a story, a purpose, a contribution to the proprietor's standing. These lands were often inherited, a precious legacy passed down from father to eldest son, forging an unbroken chain that deepened the family's roots with each passing century. The very concept of wealth was inextricably linked to this inheritance, a trust to be managed, to be grown, and ultimately, to be passed on. Selling a significant portion of family land was rarely a casual decision, it was often a sign of deep financial distress, a fracturing of the patrimony, a painful severance from the very essence of a family's identity. Beyond the sheer physical expanse, the land was, first and foremost, the primary source of income. This was an agricultural age, where the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons, by planting and harvesting. A wealthy landowner would possess not only the fertile fields but also the numerous farms, often rented out to tenants. These tenants, in turn, would pay their rents, typically in monetary form, but sometimes in kind, with a portion of their harvest. This steady stream of income, derived directly from the productivity of the land, formed the financial backbone of the aristocratic and gentry classes. It was a reliable, albeit sometimes fluctuating, income, less prone to the sudden upheavals of mercantile ventures or the distant risks of colonial trade. The financial stability offered by diversified agricultural holdings allowed families to maintain their grand lifestyles, to educate their children, and to participate in the broader social and political spheres. Consider also the timber holdings, the expansive woodlands that were an integral part of many large estates. These were not merely picturesque landscapes for leisurely strolls. The forests provided valuable timber, a critical resource for building, for ship construction, and for myriad other uses. The judicious management of these woodlands, including felling and replanting, represented another steady, long-term source of revenue. Then there were the rivers and streams traversing the property, often supplying water for mills, another potential income stream, or providing opportunities for fishing and hunting, activities that were both recreational and, for those of lesser means, a vital source of sustenance. But the influence of land extended far beyond mere financial sustenance. It conferred immense social power. To be a large landowner was to be at the apex of the local community. The tenants and laborers who worked the land and lived within the estate's boundaries were, to varying degrees, dependent on the landowner. This dependence fostered a hierarchical structure, a web of obligations and loyalties that stretched from the grand manor house down to the humblest cottage. The squire or the lord of the manor was often the local magistrate, the arbiter of disputes, the patron of the church, and the primary provider of charity for the poor. His word carried significant weight, his decisions shaped the lives of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of individuals. Imagine a small village nestled within the heart of such an estate. The very rhythm of its existence would be intimately tied to the decisions and fortunes of the landowner. Whether a new road was built, a cottage repaired, or a local school supported, these choices often emanated from the great house. The landowner was expected to be a benevolent steward, to care for his people, even as they served his interests. This paternalistic relationship, though often fraught with imbalances of power, was a fundamental characteristic of the social fabric of the time. The social standing of a family was not merely measured by the size of their bank account, but by the acres they commanded, by the number of souls who lived and worked under their indirect sway. And then, there was the profound political power that land ownership bestowed. In many systems of government, particularly in Great Britain, the right to vote and to stand for Parliament was directly tied to the ownership of land. The more land one possessed, the greater one's electoral influence. Even where direct voting rights were not solely based on land, the sheer economic and social leverage of large landowners gave them an undeniable voice in local, and often national, politics. They held sway over how local taxes were spent, how infrastructure was developed, and how the law was administered. Consider the composition of Parliament during this era. It was overwhelmingly dominated by landowners, by individuals whose entire worldview was shaped by their relationship with the earth, with agriculture, and with the people who worked it. Their decisions, their debates, their legislative priorities, were often filtered through the lens of land ownership. Issues such as agricultural tariffs, enclosure acts, or property laws directly impacted their interests and, by extension, the interests of the nation as they perceived it. A powerful landowner could secure a seat in Parliament for himself, or for a favorite son, or even for a trusted ally, effectively controlling a pocket borough through his influence over the electors who often resided on his land. This direct path to political influence ensured that the interests of the landowning class were consistently represented at the highest levels of government. The very concept of a gentleman farmer, or a country squire, encapsulated this blend of wealth, social standing, and political influence. These were men who, unlike mere merchants or manufacturers, derived their standing from the timeless, tangible embrace of the land. Their wealth was seen as more enduring, more dignified, less susceptible to the vagaries of trade and commerce. It represented a fundamental stability, a continuity that was highly valued in an age that revered tradition and established order. Even beyond the practicalities of income and power, land held an almost spiritual significance. It was a connection to history, to ancestors, to the very essence of national identity. To walk the fields that one's forefathers had tilled for centuries, to gaze upon the ancient trees they might have planted, was to feel a profound sense of rootedness, a connection to something much larger and older than oneself. This deep-seated sense of belonging to the land, and the land belonging to the family, fostered a unique psychological comfort and a sense of enduring legacy. It was an inheritance not just of acres, but of generations of stewardship and tradition. So, when we speak of wealth 200 years ago, we must understand that it was largely a story etched into the landscape itself. The grand houses were merely the opulent crowns upon this deeper, broader foundation of earth. The carefully cultivated gardens, the sweeping parklands, the bustling home farms, the secluded woodlands, all these components were integral parts of an economic, social, and political edifice constructed upon the bedrock of land ownership. It was a world where acreage truly meant authority, where the boundaries of an estate often delineated the sphere of a family's profound and enduring influence. As we gently draw our focus away from the fertile fields and ancient trees, we carry with us this understanding of how deeply intertwined the ground beneath our feet was with the very fabric of power and prosperity in a bygone era. Tonight, we drift back to a time when opulence was defined not just by grand architecture or shimmering silks, but by the quiet, ceaseless industry of countless hands working behind the scenes. We settle into the cushioned comfort of our minds, perhaps dimming the lights just a touch, allowing the soft glow of recollection to enfold us, as we explore the intricate ballet of domestic service that truly sustained a wealthy household 2 centuries past. If, as our journey unfolds, you find a moment of peace, perhaps you might consider a gentle click of the like button, or a quiet subscription, if you feel so inclined. The lives of the truly affluent, then, were woven into a dense tapestry of human assistance, a network of unseen labor that allowed the master and mistress to pursue their societal obligations, their leisure, and their often rather demanding social calendars with an almost effortless grace. One might imagine a grand country estate, perhaps in the rolling hills of England, or a stately townhouse nestled in the bustling heart of London or Paris. These were not self-sustaining entities, but rather intricate organisms, each limb and sinew dependent on the skilled and tireless work of a deeply structured staff. At the very top of this hierarchy, below the family itself, would preside the butler, a figure of immense authority and quiet dignity. He was not merely a server of wine or a polisher of silver, though he performed these tasks with impeccable precision. The butler was the steward of the household's interior, overseeing the male staff, managing cellar provisions, keeping detailed inventories of plate and glassware, and often acting as a confidential advisor to the master. His uniform, typically a dark coat and trousers, often with a waistcoat, spoke of his professionalism, his knowledge, and his unwavering discretion. He was often unmarried, his entire life devoted to the service of the family, his quarters typically near the domain he managed, perhaps a small, comfortably appointed room adjacent to the pantry or dining room. The butler's day began early, often before dawn, ensuring the fires were lit, the house awakening to a warmth that bespoke comfort, not effort. He would ensure the morning papers were pressed, the silver tea service gleamed, and that the footmen were perfectly attired and prepared for the day's duties. Across from him in the domestic firmament, mirroring his authority over the male staff, was the housekeeper. Her domain was perhaps even more vast, encompassing all the female servants, the cleanliness and order of every room, the management of linens, the delicate art of household provisioning, and often the oversight of guest comfort. She held the keys to the linen cupboards, the china closets, and sometimes even the family's private spaces, a trust of immense weight. Her uniform was often a neat, dark dress, perhaps with a crisp white apron and cap, reflecting her meticulous attention to detail. Like the butler, she was often unmarried, her life also dedicated to the smooth running of the house. She would rise before dawn, ensuring the kitchen staff were at their stations, that fires were lit in private rooms, and that the daily ritual of cleaning and preparing the house for the family's awakening was unfolding seamlessly. Her days involved constant inspection, the faint rustle of her skirts a testament to her perpetual motion, checking for dust in forgotten corners, ensuring the freshness of flowers, overseeing the meticulous care of antique furniture and fragile objets d'art. Beneath these 2 pillars of household management stood a myriad of other specialized roles. The cook, often trained in French cuisine if the family possessed ample means, was an artist in her own right, her domain the bustling, often sweltering, kitchen. She commanded a small army of kitchen maids and scullery maids, orchestrating elaborate meals from breakfast to dinner, often with several courses for each. Her day began at the earliest hint of dawn, preparing for the master and mistress's breakfast, then planning lunch, and finally the grand dinner, a theatrical performance of culinary skill. The scullery maids, often the youngest and least experienced, would face the arduous task of washing mountains of pots, pans, and dishes, their hands perpetually immersed in hot, soapy water. Then there were the footmen, often numerous in larger households, chosen for their height, good looks, and general bearing. They wore liveried uniforms, often in the family's colors, sometimes powdered wigs for formal occasions. They were the visible face of domestic service, attending to the dining table, answering doors, escorting guests, and running errands. Their duties were physically demanding, involving much standing, walking, and carrying, yet they were expected to maintain a quiet, almost invisible presence, speaking only when spoken to, moving with an unobtrusive efficiency. The lady's maid, a pivotal figure for the mistress of the house, was a highly skilled individual. She was far more than a dresser, she was a confidant, a hairdresser, a seamstress, a manager of the mistress's personal correspondence, and often a companion. Her position allowed her closer, more intimate access to the family than almost any other servant, requiring absolute discretion and loyalty. She would often travel with the family, her role indispensable for maintaining the mistress's elaborate wardrobe and demanding social schedule. The valet, similarly, served the master, assisting with dressing, managing his clothes and personal effects, often shaving him, and packing for journeys. He was expected to be as discreet and trustworthy as the lady's maid. Below these more senior and specialized roles existed a vast echelon of general housemaids. These young women, often from rural backgrounds, performed the truly backbreaking labor, cleaning, scrubbing, polishing, dusting, carrying coal for the many fireplaces, hauling hot water for baths. Their days were long, their duties repetitive and physically exhausting. They would often sleep in crowded attic rooms, sharing beds, their few possessions neatly stored away, their small wages often sent home to support their families. Their lives were a continuous cycle of rising before the sun, cleaning, serving, and retiring late, often with little personal time. The laundry maids would spend their days in the steamy, arduous world of the laundry room, washing, starching, ironing, and pressing vast quantities of linens, clothes, and curtains, a task made even more difficult before the advent of modern conveniences. Outside, the estate staff mirrored this interior hierarchy. The coachman, skilled in handling teams of horses, the stable boys caring for the equine inhabitants, the gardeners tending meticulously to acres of ornamental beds and kitchen gardens. These outdoor servants ensured the estate presented a perfect facade, maintained its functionality, and provided fresh produce for the kitchens. Their calloused hands and weathered faces told stories of sun, wind, and soil, a different kind of dedication than that found in the polished corridors within. The sheer number of individuals required to maintain a wealthy household 2 centuries ago is almost unfathomable to us today. A large country house might employ dozens, sometimes even hundreds, of staff. Each person, from the lowliest scullery maid to the dignified butler, played a crucial, often unseen, role in constructing the illusion of effortless grandeur that surrounded the privileged class. Their lives were intertwined with the families they served, often for decades, a relationship built on a complex foundation of dependence, expectation, and loyalty, a delicate dance of social strata. They arose before the masters and retired long after, their days a testament to silent, tireless dedication, creating the very fabric of comfort and luxury that defined being truly rich in that bygone era. Their contributions, though often unsung, were utterly essential to the rhythm and grace of those grand old houses. Tonight, we shall take another tranquil journey backward in time, to an era approximately 2 centuries past, to gently explore the quiet rhythms of daily existence for those few who found themselves at the zenith of societal standing. Please, make yourself entirely comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, and simply allow these words to wash over you, like a warm and gentle tide. Should you find a measure of peace and gentle interest in this unfolding narrative, a quiet tap on the like button or a soft subscription would be a most welcome gesture. We have spoken of grand estates and the quiet hum of an abundant household, of garments spun from silk and the subtle gleam of silver at the dining table. But beneath this surface of material splendor, there lay an equally intricate architecture of time itself, a meticulously constructed framework of daily routines and social observances that, to our modern sensibilities, might appear both wonderfully structured and, at times, perhaps a little confining. For the truly wealthy of 2 centuries ago, life was not merely lived, it was performed, with a quiet grace and an unwavering adherence to an unwritten but deeply understood script. Let us begin with the very dawning of the day, a moment that, for the master and mistress of a grand house, was far removed from the clamor of first light. While the scullery maid might be stirring at 4 or 5, rekindling embers and scrubbing floors, the privileged occupants of the finest bedchambers would typically awaken to a world already a little warmed by the industriousness of others. The first soft tapping at the door would announce the arrival of a personal maid or valet, bearing a tray with a delicate porcelain cup of tea or a small glass of cordial. This was not merely about sustenance, it was an act of gentle preparation, a slow unfolding from sleep into the day, accompanied by the rustle of fine linen and the soft murmur of respectful inquiries about the night's rest. The act of dressing was itself a leisurely and elaborate affair. For a lady, this involved several layers of undergarments, each meticulously fastened, followed by corsetry, designed not for comfort but for the prevailing silhouette of the era, creating an almost architectural shape to the torso. Then came the petticoats, often several, providing volume and a soft swish with each step, culminating in the gown itself, perhaps of muslin or silk, adorned with ribbons, lace, and delicate embroidery. The maid, with skilled fingers, would assist in the lacing of bodices, the arrangement of shawls, and the delicate pinning of a bonnet, ensuring every detail was perfectly composed. For a gentleman, while perhaps less voluminous, the process was no less precise: starched shirts, carefully tied cravats that required significant artistry, waistcoats, tailored coats, and gleaming boots, all presented with an immaculate finish. This morning ritual could easily consume an hour, or even 2, a quiet, unhurried preface to the day's engagements. Breakfast, unlike the quick convenience of today, was often a substantial and unhurried meal, served in a specific breakfast parlor rather than the grand dining room. It might include pastries, eggs, cured meats, fruits, and hot beverages, all laid out with the same quiet care as a formal dinner. It was a family affair, a time for gentle conversation and perhaps a brief review of the day's letters or accounts, read aloud by a secretary or even the lady of the house, who often managed the household budgets and arrangements with considerable acumen. The children, if of a certain age, might join for a portion of the meal, demonstrating their manners under the watchful, if usually gentle, eye of their governess. After breakfast, the day began to diverge according to gender and specific social obligations. For gentlemen, the morning hours were frequently dedicated to business, even if that business was simply managing their estates or investments from the comfort of their study. Correspondence dictated to a secretary, meetings with estate managers or lawyers, a perusal of the latest newspapers and political pamphlets, these were the quiet pursuits of a man of means, all conducted with a certain gravitas and methodical precision. A ride on horseback or a stroll through the estate grounds might also be part of this period, combining exercise with an inspection of their dominion. For ladies, the mornings often involved a series of intricate household management tasks. While servants executed the physical labor, the mistress of the house was the chief administrator, overseeing menus, discussing arrangements with the housekeeper, instructing the governess, and perhaps engaging in needlework or artistic pursuits. It was also during these morning hours that the delicate ritual of morning calls would often take place. These were brief, formal visits paid to friends, acquaintances, or new arrivals in the neighborhood, a crucial component of polite society. A lady would typically leave her card, perhaps exchange a few pleasantries, and then depart, often making a circuit of several houses in a single morning. The rules of these calls were strict. A call lasting too long could be seen as an imposition, too short as an insult. Leaving a card was an art form in itself, indicating who was present and whom one wished to acknowledge. As midday approached, a light luncheon might be served, less formal than breakfast or dinner, but still a structured meal. Afterwards, the pace of the day would often pick up, leading into the heart of the afternoon, a time dedicated to further social engagements, leisurely pursuits, or personal improvement. A drive in a carriage through the park, a visit to a milliner or a bookseller, perhaps a turn around a fashionable promenade, these were the gentle diversions of a well-ordered afternoon. For those with intellectual inclinations, this might be a time for reading, music practice, or engaging in genteel studies. Young ladies, under the watchful eye of their governess or chaperone, would continue their education in accomplishments such as playing the pianoforte, drawing, or speaking French, always with an eye toward enhancing their eligibility in the marriage market. The late afternoon would often signal a return home, a period for rest and preparation for the evening's activities. This could involve a quiet hour alone, perhaps a gentle nap, or a changing into fresh attire, not yet formal evening wear, but something comfortable yet elegant, suitable for a quiet tea or receiving a few intimate visitors. Tea, often a rather elaborate affair in the drawing room, was another social anchor of the day, a time for relaxed conversation over delicate sandwiches and pastries, infused with the gentle steam of Darjeeling or Earl Grey. And then, as twilight began to deepen, the day subtly shifted once more, transforming into the realm of evening assemblies and formal dinners. This was the pinnacle of social display, the stage upon which a family's standing and taste were most publicly presented. The choice of ensemble was critical, ball gowns of shimmering silk or velvet for ladies, often cut low across the décolletage and adorned with jewels, while gentlemen donned tailcoats, pristine white waistcoats, and carefully tied cravats, their gold watch chains subtly glinting. Hair would be dressed, often with plumes or elaborate pins, and white gloves would be donned, an essential accessory for both genders when circulating in polite society. Dinners were grand affairs, often beginning late, sometimes as late as 8 or 9 in the evening. Guests would arrive, arrayed in their finest, and convene in the drawing room for an hour of pre-dinner conversation, often with glasses of sherry or ratafia. The ritual of going in to dinner was itself a carefully choreographed dance, with ladies and gentlemen pairing off according to established precedents, often arm in arm, filing into the magnificent dining room. The meals themselves were elaborate, multi-course affairs, served with a precise etiquette. Dishes were often presented in two removes, with a vast array of choices on the table simultaneously, from roasted meats and game to intricate tarts, jellies, and puddings, all accompanied by fine wines. Conversation was expected to be witty, engaging, and light, never straying into overly serious or controversial topics. Following dinner, the ladies would traditionally withdraw to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen to their port and cigars for a time, discussing politics or business with a greater degree of frankness. After some while, the gentlemen would rejoin the ladies, and the evening would continue with music, card games such as whist or quadrille, quiet conversation, and perhaps dancing if it was an especially grand assembly or ball. These gatherings were not merely for amusement, they were crucial arenas for networking, for arranging marriages, for solidifying social positions, all conducted amidst an atmosphere of refined elegance and subtle observation. Finally, as the clock advanced toward midnight, or even later if the company was particularly animated, the carriages would begin to arrive, one by one, to convey guests back to their own grand residences. The goodbyes would be exchanged with quiet civility, and the host and hostess would at last find a moment of peace in their splendid, now quiet, home. The servants, having worked tirelessly through the day and evening, would begin the laborious task of clearing, cleaning, and preparing for the next morning's quiet dawn, ready to restart the meticulously structured day. Each day, for the wealthy of 2 centuries past, was a carefully orchestrated symphony of social duty, personal elegance, and leisure pursuits, a quiet testament to a world where time itself seemed to unfold with a more deliberate, more graceful pace. Tonight, we continue our gentle exploration into the past, into a world touched by the elegance and intricacies of wealth 2 centuries ago. As the soft glow of evening settles, perhaps you might find a comfortable position, allow your surroundings to recede, and simply listen to the quiet murmur of history. If, as our journey unfolds, you find yourself drifting into a peaceful slumber, or simply enjoying the gentle unraveling of these historical threads, then our purpose is met. You might, if you wish, offer a quiet sign of your enjoyment, though there is no expectation, only the soft invitation to relax. Let us now turn our attention to the exquisite, and sometimes rather challenging, world of fashion and adornment for the wealthy in the early 19th century. This was a realm where fabric, cut, and embellishment spoke a language of status more eloquently than words often could. For both men and women of means, clothing was far more than mere covering, it was a carefully constructed statement, a public declaration of one's position within the intricate social tapestry of the era, and indeed, a testament to their ability to afford such luxurious and often impractical garments. Consider first the ladies of this privileged class. Their days began with a meticulous ritual, often aided by several maids, especially for the more intricate ensembles. While perhaps less overtly restrictive than the heavy corsetry of earlier periods, the fashion of the early 19th century, specifically the Regency or Empire style, roughly from 1800 to 1820, still dictated a particular silhouette. This was characterized by a high waistline, often just below the bust, from which the skirt flowed in a relatively straight, soft line downward. The ideal material for these elegant gowns was often fine cotton muslin, imported from India, sometimes even silk or lightweight wool. These fabrics, while seemingly simple, were expensive, especially when of the highest quality and adorned with delicate embroidery or lace. The transparency of muslin, in particular, was fashionable, often necessitating several petticoats beneath to provide both modesty and a fuller drape. The discomfort, when it existed, often arose from the very demands of fashion itself. While the true corsets of the Georgian era had somewhat receded in prominence, stays, or a short corset, was still worn by many women to lift and separate the bust and to provide a smooth, classical line under the high-waisted gown. These were not the extreme instruments of later Victorian fashion, but they still required a certain degree of acclimatization. The shoes of the era were typically flat slippers, often made of satin or kid leather, quite delicate and really rather unsuited for long walks on uneven city streets, or indeed for much outdoor activity beyond the most manicured garden paths. The delicate nature of these shoes underscored the fact that a wealthy woman's primary mode of transport would be a carriage, her feet rarely touching the coarser realities of the pavement. Beyond the core gown, accessories played a crucial role in completing and elevating the ensemble. Fine cashmere shawls, imported at great expense from India, were indispensable. These large, often intricately patterned wraps provided much-needed warmth over the relatively light gowns, especially in the notoriously drafty drawing rooms and ballrooms of the era. They were also a potent symbol of wealth and global connection. Long gloves, reaching past the elbow, were almost universally worn during social occasions, adding an air of refined modesty and elegance. Headwear, too, underwent fashionable transformations, from simple bonnets tied under the chin to more elaborate turbans adorned with feathers or jewels for evening wear. The very act of choosing and coordinating these numerous items, often several times a day for various social engagements, morning calls, afternoon promenades, evening musicales, or grand balls, was a time-consuming luxury afforded only by those with ample leisure and a staff to assist. Now, let us turn our gaze to the gentlemen of this period, whose attire, though perhaps less overtly encumbered than their female counterparts, was no less indicative of their standing. The early 19th century saw a significant shift in men's fashion, moving away from the elaborate silks, laces, and powdered wigs of the previous century towards a more understated, yet undeniably refined, elegance. This was the age of the dandy, epitomized by figures like Beau Brummel, who championed impeccable tailoring, high-quality fabrics, and perfect fit over overt ornamentation. The core of a wealthy man's wardrobe consisted of several key pieces. The frock coat or tailcoat, often in dark wool or superfine broadcloth, was the dominant outer garment. These were exquisitely tailored, designed to enhance the male silhouette, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist. Beneath this, a waistcoat, perhaps in a contrasting color or patterned silk, provided a touch of individual flair. Then came the trousers or breeches. For formal occasions, breeches, often cut quite close to the leg and ending at the knee, were still common, paired with elegant silk stockings. However, the early 19th century also saw the rise of full-length trousers, a more practical and indeed, more comfortable option that was slowly gaining acceptance for all but the most formal evening wear. The true artistry of men's fashion often lay in the details, particularly around the neck. The cravat was paramount. This carefully folded and tied piece of linen or silk around the neck was a source of intense preoccupation and sometimes considerable discomfort. Elaborate knots, often requiring significant practice and even the assistance of a valet, were fashionable. A perfectly tied cravat signified both leisure and an acute attention to personal grooming, a mark of the true gentleman. The starched collars, often high and stiff, contributed to the overall formality and could, one imagines, feel rather constricting, especially when combined with a tightly knotted cravat. Footwear for gentlemen consisted of polished leather boots or dress shoes, which, while more robust than women's slippers, were still considered delicate for their time, particularly the finely made riding boots which were worn with a particular pride. Gloves were also an essential accessory for men, especially when venturing out or attending social events, signifying cleanliness and refinement. Hats, such as the bicorn or the emerging top hat, completed the ensemble, adding both a practical element of protection from the elements and a clear indication of social standing. The fabrics themselves were a significant indicator of wealth. While cotton and wool were becoming more accessible, the finest qualities, superfine broadcloth for coats, the softest cashmere for waistcoats, imported Indian muslin for shirts, and lustrous silks for cravats and stockings, were prohibitively expensive. The sheer cost of acquiring these materials, along with the numerous hours of skilled tailoring required to produce a well-fitting garment, meant that only the truly affluent could afford a wardrobe of diverse and appropriate outfits for every social function and time of day. To be seen in a worn or ill-fitting garment was a subtle but potent mark of declining fortune or, worse, a lack of social grace. The discomfort, then, for both men and women, was often a subtle undercurrent, a byproduct of the very pursuit of elegance and status. It was the stiffness of a starched cravat, the delicate impracticality of satin slippers, the layered warmth of muslins and shawls in an already warm room, the precise fit of tailored garments that allowed little room for indulgence. Yet, these discomforts were often borne without complaint, seen as a small price to pay for the social currency that impeccably fashion conferred. These garments, with their intricate details and demanding forms, served as an elegant, silent language, articulating in no uncertain terms the wealth and refined taste of those who wore them, shaping their daily movements and interactions in a world where appearances held profound sway. The rustle of a silk gown, the gleam of polished leather on a boot, the perfectly knotted cravat, these were the quiet signifiers of a privileged existence, a world observed through the delicate lens of fashion, centuries ago. Tonight, we drift back to a time when opulence was defined not just by riches, but by the quiet cultivation of the mind, a gentle tapestry woven through generations, in an era roughly 2 centuries removed from our hurried present. Find yourself a most comfortable position, perhaps dim the lights a touch, allowing the soft glow to invite a serene contemplation of history. If, as our journey unfolds, you find a measure of peace and a gentle curiosity stirred within, consider lingering with us, perhaps even subscribing, a quiet nod of appreciation for these narratives. Let us now turn our attention to the delicate art of shaping young minds within these privileged households, exploring the specialized education that was the birthright of many, a distinction that truly separated them in a world where formal schooling was far from universal. For boys, particularly those destined to inherit estates or assume positions of influence, the path was often paved with the hallowed traditions of classical studies. From a tender age, sometimes as early as 5 or 6, a tutor, often a young man recently graduated from university, or a clergyman seeking additional income, would become a permanent fixture in the household. He was not merely an instructor, but a guide, a quiet mentor, meticulously chosen for his erudition and, crucially, his moral rectitude. Every morning, after a light breakfast, the studies would commence, often in a quiet, dedicated schoolroom within the manor. The air, crisp and hinting at the damp earth outside, would carry the low hum of voices as Latin verbs were conjugated, Greek myths recounted, and mathematical problems painstakingly solved. Latin, of course, was paramount, seen not merely as a dead language, but as the very foundation of European thought, literature, and law. It was the language of Cicero's elegant oratory, Virgil's heroic verse, and Livy's grand histories. Boys would spend hours translating intricate passages, their quills scratching softly on parchment, their minds grappling with declensions and conjugations, a mental exercise believed to foster discipline, precision, and logical thinking. Greek followed, opening another window into antiquity, revealing the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, the dramas of Sophocles and Euripides, and the foundational texts of Western science and medicine. Imagine the scent of aged leather bindings, the faint, comforting musk of old paper, as young hands carefully turned the pages of a Homeric epic, tracing the sweeping narratives of gods and heroes. These classical languages were not learned for mere academic exercise, they were passports. They were the keys to unlocking the accumulated wisdom of millennia, to engaging with the great minds that had shaped Western civilization. A gentleman of education was expected to not only understand these texts but to occasionally quote them, to weave them into his conversation, demonstrating a depth of learning that was both admirable and essential to his social standing. Beyond languages, mathematics, particularly arithmetic and geometry, formed another pillar of their intellectual development. This was not only for practical purposes, such as managing estate accounts or understanding architecture, but also for its perceived ability to train the mind in rigorous, logical thought. Imagine a young heir, bent over a slate, carefully drawing geometric figures, understanding the elegance of Euclidean proofs, his brow furrowed in quiet concentration. Geography, history, and a rudimentary understanding of the natural sciences, often referred to as natural philosophy, also found their place in this comprehensive curriculum. They learned about the great empires of the past, the voyages of discovery, the constellations in the night sky, and the classifications of flora and fauna, acquiring a broad general knowledge that would enable them to converse intelligently on a vast array of subjects. Physical accomplishments were also woven into the fabric of a young gentleman's education. Fencing, riding, and sometimes even a degree of military drill were considered important for developing an upright posture, physical prowess, and a sense of bearing. These were the skills that honed not just the mind, but the body, preparing them for a life of leadership, responsibility, and, occasionally, even military service. The rigorous schedule, from dawn until early evening, punctuated by meals and perhaps a short period of outdoor recreation, was designed to cultivate not only intelligence but also resilience, perseverance, and a deep sense of duty. Now, let us gently shift our gaze to the education of young ladies from these affluent households, a path distinctly different, yet equally purposeful and meticulously planned. Their world, too, was one of structured learning, but its aims were not the same as their brothers. Girls were primarily educated within the home, either by a governess, a refined, often gently impoverished lady of good family, or, in some cases, by their mothers. The emphasis for girls was on acquiring a constellation of accomplishments, a term that encompassed a wide array of social graces and artistic skills, all designed to prepare them for their future roles as wives, mothers, and hostesses within polite society. Music, perhaps above all, held a venerable place in a young lady's education. The gentle strains of a piano, a harp, or a spinet would often fill the drawing rooms of these grand houses, a testament to the hours of dedicated practice. Imagine a young woman, perhaps 10 or 12 years old, her fingers gracefully gliding over ivory keys, a music master patiently correcting her posture or the nuance of her phrasing. The ability to play an instrument, particularly the piano, was a highly valued skill. It provided entertainment for the family, charmed callers, and was considered a reflection of her inner sensibility and refined taste. Sheet music, often intricately bound, would be a cherished possession, passed down through generations. Young ladies would spend considerable time perfecting their pieces, practicing scales and arpeggios until they could perform a sonata or a popular air with both technical proficiency and emotional expression. Alongside music, drawing and painting were also widely cultivated. These pursuits allowed for the expression of creativity within acceptable bounds, and a lady's watercolor sketches of landscapes, flowers, or even delicate portraits were often displayed within the home, admired by guests. Imagine the soft rustle of paper, the quiet discipline of mixing pigments, as a young woman meticulously renders a botanical study, her focus absolute, the morning light illuminating her steady hand. This was not merely a pastime, it was an exercise in observation, patience, and aesthetics. Languages, too, were an essential part of a young lady's accomplishments, though often different ones from those studied by her brothers. French was almost universally taught, considered the language of international diplomacy, high society, and elegant literature. A well-bred lady was expected to converse in French, to read French novels and poetry, and perhaps even to write letters in the language. Italian was another popular choice, particularly for its connection to opera and classical art. Imagine a quiet afternoon, the governess patiently guiding a young lady through French grammar, the rhythm of the foreign words a gentle counterpoint to the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. Needlework, including embroidery, lace-making, and plain sewing, was not merely a domestic chore for these young ladies, it was an art form. Intricate patterns, delicate stitching, and the creation of beautiful utilitarian objects were highly valued. A sampler, painstakingly embroidered with the alphabet, numbers, and perhaps a moralizing verse, was often one of a girl's earliest accomplishments, a tangible record of her discipline and skill. Imagine the soft glint of a needle, the slow, deliberate motion of fabric passing under skilled fingers, creating patterns that spoke of patience and quiet dedication. Dancing, deportment, and etiquette were also of paramount importance. A dancing master would be employed to teach the intricate steps of the quadrille, the minuet, or later, the waltz. These lessons were not just about movement, they were about grace, poise, and understanding the complex social rituals of the ballroom. Hours were spent learning how to curtsy, how to enter and exit a room, how to address one's elders and superiors, how to carry oneself with a quiet dignity and confidence. These were the lessons that sculpted not just the physical form, but the very essence of social interaction in their world. Physical activity, while not as rigorous as for boys, might include gentle walks in the garden, horseback riding, side saddle, of course, or perhaps a round of croquet, all contributing to a healthy complexion and an elegant bearing. While the education of boys emphasized public leadership and intellectual rigor, and that of girls focused on domestic management, social grace, and cultural refinement, it is important to understand that both were deeply serious undertakings, designed to equip them for specific and demanding roles within their stratified society. The goal was to produce young men capable of governing, managing, and leading, and young women capable of presiding over elegant homes, cultivating refined social circles, and raising the next generation. These were not merely recreational pursuits, they were fundamental investments in their future, painstakingly cultivated over years, the quiet foundations upon which their lives, and indeed the lives of their families, would be built. The very air they breathed, imbued with the scent of leather, ink, and fragrant tea, was a silent testament to the constant pursuit of knowledge and accomplishment, a gentle, unhurried rhythm of learning that shaped the privileged minds of 2 centuries past. Tonight, we drift back to a time when opulence was defined not just by riches, but by the very fabric of daily existence, a subtle tapestry woven with threads of privilege and extraordinary routine. Perhaps you would like to position yourself comfortably now, allowing the gentle hum of the evening to settle around you, dimming any bright lights, as we explore a world that has long since faded into the quiet annals of history. Should you find a measure of peace in our journey this evening, a soft contentment in these quiet narratives, perhaps you might consider subscribing, or leaving a small mark of appreciation. Our wealthy individuals, 2 centuries ago, possessed a distinct understanding of the world, one shaped profoundly by the very act of movement, or rather, the profound undertaking that travel then represented. It was not the swift, almost instantaneous transition we now know, but a laborious ballet of preparation and patience, often stretching across weeks or even months for journeys we might today accomplish in mere hours. For the elite, however, travel was more than just a means to an end, it was a testament to their station, a performance of their prosperity, and a conduit for their intellectual and cultural refinement. Imagine, if you will, the bustling scene preceding a departure. Not simply a packing of a single suitcase, but the meticulous preparation of numerous trunks, often handmade from sturdy wood, reinforced with brass, and covered in fine leather, each one carefully inventorying an extensive wardrobe, essential personal effects, and even small comforts from home. These would be loaded onto specially commissioned carriages, perhaps a private post-chaise, designed for comfort and speed, or at least, the fastest speed attainable on the often rutted and uneven roads of the era. These carriages were marvels of engineering for their time, though compared to modern vehicles, they were simple, unsprung machines, their internal spaces upholstered for some semblance of comfort, often with velvet or silk, but still subject to the incessant jolting and swaying that characterized travel. A private carriage often meant the luxury of customization, built taller or wider, perhaps with a small, built-in desk for writing, or compartments for books and provisions. The interiors might be lined with thick, sound-dampening fabrics, attempting to mute the constant clatter of hooves and wheels. Traveling alongside the family would be a retinue of servants, a valet or lady's maid to attend to personal needs, a cook, perhaps a footman or two for heavy lifting and security, and naturally, stable hands or grooms for the care of the horses. This entire entourage required meticulous planning for accommodation and sustenance along the way, a complex logistical undertaking resembling a small, self-contained moving household. Let us consider the challenges that these journeys presented. Roads, even the main arteries between major cities, were often in a state of disrepair. Potholes were commonplace, mud was an ever-present adversary, and in mountainous regions, the paths could be treacherous, prone to landslides or sudden weather changes. The speed of travel was dictated by the stamina of the horses, necessitating frequent stops to rest and change teams. A journey of just 100 miles could easily consume an entire day, or even more, depending on the terrain and the weather. Night travel was generally avoided due to poor visibility and increased risk, meaning that every journey of significant length required overnight stays. These wealthy travelers would seek out the finest inns and posting houses strategically located along the main routes. These establishments, though often rustic by today's standards, offered the best available comforts, a warm meal, a fresh bed, and secure stabling for the horses. Yet, even in these best inns, conditions could be variable. Heating was often limited to fireplaces, and privacy was not always assured. Despite these challenges, the ability to command such resources, a private carriage, a team of servants, and the financial means to frequent the best accommodations, was a clear demarcation of their social standing. Among the most emblematic forms of travel for the wealthy was the Grand Tour. This was not merely a vacation, but a rite of passage, an essential component of a gentleman's education, and increasingly, an aspiration for young ladies of means. Typically undertaken upon coming of age, or after completing university, the Grand Tour was an extended journey, often lasting from several months to several years, through the cultural centers of Europe. The primary destinations were almost invariably France and Italy. Paris, with its sophisticated society, its vibrant intellectual scene, and its burgeoning artistic movements, was often the first extended stop. Here, young men and women would refine their French language skills, attend balls and salons, learn the intricacies of European etiquette, and perhaps even indulge in some of the more fashionable vices. The city was a crucible for social polish, where one might learn the delicate art of conversation, the nuances of fashion, and the subtle dance of polite society. Following the allure of Paris, the journey would inevitably lead south, over the formidable Alps, a journey of breathtaking scenery and considerable peril, into the sun-drenched landscapes of Italy. Italy was considered the spiritual heart of classical antiquity and the birthplace of the Renaissance, offering a profound educational experience. Florence, with its Medici legacy and artistic treasures, was a mandatory stop. Rome, the Eternal City, with its ancient ruins and papal grandeur, demanded extensive exploration, often with a hired scholar or an antiquarian acting as a guide, interpreting the layers of history unearthed at every turn. Naples, with its proximity to Pompeii and Herculaneum, offered a tangible connection to the Roman Empire, allowing one to walk the very streets of a civilization long past. The purpose of these tours was multifaceted. For gentlemen, it was an opportunity to deepen their understanding of classical history, fine art, and architecture. They would study masterpieces, collect antiquities, either genuine artifacts or carefully crafted replicas, and engage with leading scholars and artists. It was an experiential education, far removed from the confines of a lecture hall, fostering a broader, more cosmopolitan worldview essential for a future leader or landowner. For young women, while sometimes more chaperoned and focused on cultural appreciation rather than academic pursuits, it offered exposure to diverse societies, linguistic refinement, and opportunities to acquire fashionable clothing and jewelry, enhancing their matrimonial prospects. The Grand Tour was also a social proving ground. It was an opportunity to network with other wealthy Europeans, to establish connections that could be beneficial for business, politics, or simply social prestige upon return. Letters of introduction from influential figures were crucial, opening doors to private collections, exclusive salons, and even audiences with minor nobility. The very act of having completed a grand tour bestowed a certain cachet, signaling a completed education and a refined taste. Consider the cost involved. Such a journey was an enormous financial undertaking, far beyond the means of all but the richest families. Maintaining a suite of servants, hiring translators, purchasing works of art, paying for lavish accommodations, and securing transport across a continent demanded substantial capital. The cost of a respectable grand tour could easily equate to several times the annual income of a successful professional or a substantial portion of a landed estate's annual yield. This expense itself served as a powerful filter, ensuring that only the truly affluent could partake in this ultimate cultural odyssey. Beyond the formal educational aspects, there was a psychological effect. These long, arduous journeys fostered a sense of self-reliance, albeit within the confines of privilege. Navigating foreign lands, encountering different customs, and overcoming the inevitable minor mishaps of travel cultivated a certain worldly resilience. Upon their return, these grand tourists would possess an expanded perspective, a deeper appreciation for their own culture, and a wealth of stories and experiences to share, further cementing their status as individuals of broad intellect and cultivated taste. The Grand Tour also fueled an entire cottage industry of goods and services. Printmakers created travel guides and maps, artists were commissioned to paint portraits or capture iconic landscapes for souvenirs, and specialized merchants catered to the unique requirements of the wealthy traveler. This network of support, this entire ecosystem built around the movement of the elite, further underscores the profound economic impact of their privileged lifestyle. So, in an age without rapid transit, without instant communication, the act of travel for the wealthy was transformed into an art form, a complex ballet of resource management, personal refinement, and societal advancement. It was a tangible manifestation of their wealth, a demonstration of their power to command resources and navigate the world on their own terms, truly an experience reserved for a fortunate few. Tomorrow, our gentle journey continues, as we explore another nuanced facet of this extraordinary past. Tonight, we drift back to a world softly illuminated by gaslight and the soft glow of banked fireplaces, a time when the very notion of wealth carried a different timbre, a different scent. So, as you settle into your most comfortable place, perhaps dimming the lights until only a gentle ambient glow remains, let us journey together. If, by the end of our tranquil exploration tonight, you find yourself pleasantly lulled into a state of serene relaxation, perhaps you might consider offering a gentle like, or even subscribing, to join us again on future journeys into the quiet corners of history. We have explored the grand homes and the meticulous attire, the subtle dance of power, and the quiet mechanics of domestic life that shaped the existence of the affluent 2 centuries ago. Now, our gaze softly shifts, much like a curtain gently drawn back from a window onto a peaceful country estate, to the moments of respite, the gentle diversions, the very essence of what constituted entertainment and leisure for those of comfortable means. This was not a world of instant gratification or bustling digital engagement, rather, it was a tapestry woven with patience, with presence, and often, with a profound appreciation for the ephemeral beauty of art and nature. Imagine, if you will, the soft murmur of an evening gathering in a sumptuously appointed drawing room. The air might be faintly scented with beeswax polish and the delicate perfume of hothouse flowers, perhaps a gentle wisp of wood smoke from the nearby hearth. For many, an evening of entertainment would begin with conversation, a finely honed art amongst the educated classes. Topics ranged widely, from the latest political developments reported in the morning papers, often read aloud and discussed with measured prose, to profound philosophical debates sparked by a recent publication or a lively exchange of ideas encountered during a foreign tour. The hostess, with an almost imperceptible flick of her fan, might steer the conversation gracefully, ensuring every guest felt included, their contributions valued. Music, of course, was an integral part of these social evenings. A skilled pianist, often one of the family members, might take to the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting the flickering candlelight. The melodies chosen would be diverse, perhaps a stirring sonata from Beethoven, a delicate nocturne by Chopin, or the lilting grace of a waltz by Schubert, its notes filling the room with a gentle resonance. Sometimes, a quartet of musicians might be hired for a more formal affair, their bows moving in synchronized precision, creating a rich tapestry of sound that would envelop the listeners, transporting them beyond the confines of the drawing room walls. These were not mere background sounds, they were moments of collective focus, of shared aesthetic appreciation, deeply savored in an era before the pervasive presence of recorded music. Beyond the intimate domestic sphere, for those residing in bustling urban centers like London or Paris, the public concert hall offered a grander, more formalized musical experience. Imagine the hushed anticipation as the orchestra took its place, the rustle of programs, the soft coughs quickly stifled. The conductor, a figure of dignified authority, would raise his baton, and then, a symphony would unfurl, a journey of sound, of power and delicacy, of soaring crescendos and whispering pianissimos. Attending such a concert was not just about the music itself, it was a societal event, an opportunity to see and be seen, to display one's sartorial elegance, and to participate in the shared cultural narrative of the day. The intervals between movements offered moments for polite mingling, for quiet observations, and for the exchange of whispered comments on the performance. The theater also held a prominent place in the lexicon of leisure. For an evening at the playhouse, ladies and gentlemen would dress in their finest attire, arriving in carriages that would line the cobbled streets outside. The interiors of the theaters were often gilded and opulent, the tiers of boxes showcasing the wealthiest patrons, their faces softly illuminated by the gaslighting. From the moralizing dramas of the era to the lighter frivolity of comedies and farces, plays offered an escape, a mirror reflecting or subtly distorting the societal norms of the time. The experience was interactive in its own way, audiences were often vocal, expressing their approval or disapproval with robust enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the more subdued etiquette of modern audiences. For the gentlemen, clubs played an indispensable role in their social and leisure lives. These exclusive establishments, often housed in beautifully appointed Georgian or Victorian townhouses, offered a sanctuary from the demands of family life and the rigorous strictures of society. Imagine the soft scent of leather and cigar smoke, the quiet clinking of glasses. Here, amidst deep mahogany and hushed conversations, gentlemen could engage in card games like whist or écarté, read the latest newspapers from around the world, or simply enjoy a quiet brandy and conversation with like-minded peers. The club was a place for networking, for political discussions, for forging alliances, and for the simple camaraderie of male society, away from the watchful eyes of their wives and the pressures of their public roles. Beyond the urban centers, the countryside offered an entirely different palette of leisure activities, particularly for those with sprawling estates. The hunting party was perhaps the quintessential rural pastime for the aristocracy and landed gentry. Picture the crisp autumn air, the vibrant hues of the turning leaves, the distant baying of hounds. Gentlemen, mounted on powerful horses, dressed in their tailored riding habits, would set off across vast fields and through ancient woodlands, accompanied by their gamekeepers and a pack of eager foxhounds. This was an activity that combined skill, daring, and a deep connection to the land. It was a test of horsemanship, of strategic thinking, and of endurance. The thrill of the chase, the physical exertion, and the camaraderie forged in the field were profoundly valued, culminating perhaps in a lavish dinner at the estate at the end of a successful day, with stories of the day's exploits enlivening the conversation. Shooting parties, targeting game birds such as pheasant or grouse, were another popular outdoor pursuit. These events were meticulously planned, involving numerous beaters to flush out the birds, and often extended over several days, drawing guests from neighboring estates. Ladies, though not always participating directly in the hunt, would often be present, partaking in the accompanying social events, the elaborate luncheons, and the evening dinners. The entire affair was a demonstration of wealth and social standing, a careful orchestration of hospitality and sport. For the ladies, in quieter moments, gardens offered a serene sanctuary. The creation and cultivation of elaborate gardens became an artistic pursuit, reflecting both wealth and a refined aesthetic sensibility. Imagine strolling along gravel paths, past meticulously manicured flower beds, fragrant with roses and lavender, beneath the dappled shade of ancient trees. The appreciation of botanical specimens, the quiet contemplation of nature's beauty, and the gentle social interaction of a garden party were cherished pastimes, offering a peaceful counterpoint to the more formal demands of social life. Sketching, watercolors, and the gentle art of embroidery or needlework also provided solace and creative expression within the more private confines of their homes, often accompanied by the softly rustling pages of a novel or a book of poetry read aloud. Travel, though not as readily accessible as it is today, was another significant form of leisure for the wealthy. The grand tour of Europe, a prolonged sojourn through cultural capitals like Rome, Florence, and Paris, was an almost obligatory rite of passage for young gentlemen of means. It was seen as an essential part of their education, broadening their minds, cultivating their tastes in art and architecture, and refining their social graces. Even for families, a trip to a fashionable spa town, such as Bath or Baden-Baden, for the purported health benefits of the waters, became a social event, a chance to relax, mingle, and display one's latest fashions. These journeys, undertaken by carriage, ship, or later by the nascent railway, were often long and arduous, yet they offered immense rewards in terms of experience, cultural enrichment, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing the world beyond one's own familiar borders. The essence of leisure 2 centuries ago was not merely about filling time, but about the quality of that time. It was about engagement, with art, with nature, with conversation, with physical pursuits. It was a world that encouraged presence, where each activity, each shared moment, carried a weight of significance. The wealthy, with their ample resources, could curate their lives with an array of enriching experiences, from the quiet contemplation of a garden stroll to the thrilling adrenaline of a fox hunt, each thread contributing to the intricate mosaic of their privileged existence. And so, as these gentle images softly fade, carrying with them the whispers of classical music and the distant baying of hounds, we can feel a sense of the quiet richness that defined the leisure of a bygone era, allowing these tranquil impressions to lead us gently into slumber. Tonight, as the evening settles around us, we drift back to a world where fortunes, however vast, could not always guarantee reprieve from the tender mercies of illness. Let your breath deepen, let your shoulders soften, and perhaps dim the lights a little more, allowing a gentle hush to envelop your space. If you find tonight's journey comforting, a quiet like or subscribe would be a lovely gesture. We have explored the gilded cages and sumptuous silk of the rich life 2 centuries ago, yet even within those magnificent walls, an unwelcome spectre often lingered. This chapter quietly introduces us to the realm of health and medicine, a landscape profoundly different from our own, where the very concept of well-being, even for those of means, was often a precarious affair. Imagine, if you will, the bustling household of a wealthy merchant in London or a landed gentry family in the English countryside. The air might have been fragrant with beeswax and lavender, the finest cloths adorning every surface, and abundant, often exquisite, provisions filling the larder. Yet, silently, invisibly, dangers lurked. Common ailments, which we now dismiss with a few days of rest and perhaps a readily available medication, could then spiral into grave concerns, indiscriminately targeting young and old, rich and poor alike. Fevers, for instance, were a ubiquitous and terrifying adversary. Before the revelations of germ theory, the understanding of contagion was rudimentary at best. A persistent cough in a child, a sudden chill in an adult, could ignite a fear that permeated the entire household. The physician, when summoned, would arrive in his carriage, perhaps carrying a small leather bag with a few familiar tools, a lancet for bleeding, a mortar and pestle for grinding herbs, and a small collection of tinctures and powders. His knowledge, while drawn from centuries of medical tradition, was often limited by the prevailing scientific understanding of the era. Pneumonia, scarlet fever, diphtheria, dysentery, these were not distant, exotic diseases but ever-present threats, particularly for the young. Infant mortality rates, even in affluent families, were tragically high. While a wealthy household might employ an able wet nurse and have warm, clean linens, the underlying causes of many childhood illnesses remained unknown. A child's healthy glow could, with chilling swiftness, fade into a sickly pallor, and the anxious parents, despite their resources, could only watch, hope, and pray, often resorting to remedies that were either ineffective or, in some cases, actively harmful. The concept of hygiene, as we understand it today, was largely absent in a broader, systemic sense. While personal cleanliness varied, with many wealthy individuals taking regular baths and using scented soaps, the understanding of sanitation in public spaces, even in grand estates, was primitive. Water sources could be contaminated, leading to outbreaks of cholera and typhoid, diseases that struck regardless of social standing. The glittering ballrooms, the crowded theaters, the grand drawing rooms, while magnificent, could also become unwitting conduits for the spread of illness. Even seemingly minor injuries could become life-threatening. A cut, a scrape, a simple fracture, without antibiotics, the risk of infection was profound. What might now be a routine visit to an emergency room could then necessitate amputation, a barbaric procedure often performed without adequate anesthesia, leaving the patient to contend not only with the trauma of the surgery but also the very high likelihood of post-operative infection. The pain, the anguish, the ever-present threat of gangrene, painted a stark reality behind the opulent facades. The treatments themselves offered a fascinating, if sometimes disquieting, glimpse into the medical philosophy of the time. Bloodletting, a practice rooted in ancient humoral theory, was incredibly common. The belief was that illness arose from an imbalance of the four humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and that removing some of the offending humor, often blood, would restore health. Whether it was leeches applied to the skin or a physician with his sharp lancet, this was a frequent intervention for a wide array of conditions, and its efficacy was, of course, highly questionable, often weakening an already vulnerable patient. Purging and blistering were other popular remedies. Potent laxatives and emetics were administered to clear the body of perceived impurities, while blisters, induced by hot plasters or irritant substances, were thought to draw out disease from the body. These were often uncomfortable, if not agonizing, treatments, endured by even the most delicate ladies and gentlemen in their pursuit of health. Opium, in various forms, was widely used as a painkiller and sedative, providing a temporary respite from suffering, though often leading to addiction. Laudanum, an alcoholic tincture of opium, was a common household remedy, dispensed for everything from teething pain in infants to chronic aches in adults. While it dulled the senses and offered a serene escape, it also masked symptoms, delayed proper diagnosis, and created a new set of long-term problems. Surgeons, though respected, were often more akin to skilled artisans than diagnosticians. Their expertise lay in mechanical interventions, setting bones, amputating limbs, extracting teeth. The understanding of internal physiology was still in its infancy. A trip to a specialist meant encountering a bone setter, a dentist, or a barber surgeon, the latter still sometimes combining haircutting with minor surgical procedures. Hospital conditions, even in the better institutions, were often far from sterile, and the wealthy, whenever possible, preferred to be treated in the comfort, however illusory, of their own homes. The role of women in healthcare, particularly within the domestic sphere, was significant. The lady of the house, or perhaps her trusted housekeeper, would possess a collection of home remedies, passed down through generations. These might include herbal poultices, soothing teas, and comforting broths, often offering more genuine comfort and less harm than some of the more aggressive medical interventions. Midwifery was almost exclusively a female domain, with trained midwives attending births, sometimes with the assistance of a male doctor in complicated cases. Even mental health was approached with a very different understanding. Depression, anxiety, and other mental afflictions were often seen as moral failings or a sign of physical imbalance. Treatments could range from gentle rest cures in idyllic country settings to more severe institutionalization, reflecting a nascent and often misguided understanding of the complexities of the human mind. So, as we bring this chapter to a soft close, consider the quiet anxiety that must have underpinned even the most opulent existence. The grand estates, the exquisite attire, the lavish banquets, none of it offered a complete shield against the caprices of illness. The rich, too, faced the very human vulnerability of their own bodies, navigating a medical landscape where knowledge was limited, cures were elusive, and the simple act of staying well was a constant, often unspoken, struggle. Let these thoughts gently settle now, as we prepare to drift a little deeper into the slumber of the past. Tonight, we drift back to a distant whisper of time, to an era approximately 2 centuries past, to gently explore the quiet corners of what it truly meant to possess a vast fortune. Settle into your most comfortable space, perhaps dimming the lights a little, allowing the soft glow to invite a serene contemplation of the past. If, at the end of our journey, these narratives have cradled you into a peaceful slumber, a gentle like or subscription would be a most welcome gesture, a quiet affirmation of our shared journey into history's comforting embrace. We have spent some time tracing the elegant contours of daily life, the rustle of fine fabrics, the scent of well-tended gardens, and the distinct hum of a meticulously ordered household. Now, with a soft, deliberate motion, let us turn our attention to the very bedrock of such opulence, the careful and often complex management of the fortunes themselves, the intricate tapestry of finances and investments that allowed these lives of considerable comfort to unfurl. For while the exterior glowed with an effortless splendor, beneath it lay a sophisticated, sometimes precarious, balancing act of capital. Imagine, if you will, the gentle flow of income that characterized the wealth of the landed aristocracy. Their fortunes, often generations in the making, were fundamentally tethered to the vast expanses of the land itself. The rhythms of their financial year were often dictated by the seasons, by the fertility of the earth, and by the diligence of those who toiled upon it. Rent, in its myriad forms, was a primary conduit of this wealth. Tenant farmers, leasing portions of these sprawling estates, would pay their dues, sometimes in coin, sometimes in kind, a portion of their harvest or efforts flowing upwards to the landowner. This was not merely the simple collection of payments, but often involved intricate lease agreements, specifying acreage, crops, and duration, often extending for many years, sometimes even generations, establishing a deep, almost symbiotic, relationship between the lord and his tenants. The steward, a figure of immense trust and detailed knowledge, would meticulously manage these arrangements, recording every penny, every bushel, in vast, leather-bound ledgers, their pages filled with the elegant loops of copperplate script. One can almost hear the soft scratching of a quill, the rustle of parchment as these financial accounts were painstakingly updated, a testament to the methodical nature of wealth preservation. Beyond the rents derived from agricultural lands, there were also urban properties, houses within bustling towns and cities, their own set of tenants providing a different stream of income. These properties, often inherited, represented a tangible and relatively stable form of investment, providing a steady, predictable flow of revenue, a comforting constant in an age of change. Imagine a grand townhouse in a fashionable district, its rent contributing directly to the upkeep of a country estate hundreds of miles away, an invisible thread connecting urban prosperity to rural tranquility. However, the world was not static, and the astute wealthy of 2 centuries ago understood the importance of diversification, of placing one's eggs, as it were, in a variety of carefully chosen baskets. The period was characterized by a phenomenal surge of industrial innovation, a veritable revolution unfolding across the factories and workshops of the nation. It was an era of canals being dug, steam engines being perfected, and new manufacturing processes transforming raw materials into finished goods at an unprecedented pace. For those with capital to deploy, these burgeoning industries presented alluring, if sometimes risky, opportunities. Consider the textile mills, for instance, with their clamoring machinery and the tireless work of countless hands. Investing in such an enterprise meant purchasing shares, providing the necessary capital for expansion, for the acquisition of new machinery, or for the construction of larger premises. The returns, if the venture prospered, could be substantial, transforming a quiet sum into an impressive fortune within a single generation. One might envision a gentleman in his study, poring over prospectuses, his decision to invest in a cotton mill in Lancashire or a pottery works in Staffordshire a moment of quiet calculation that would ripple through his family's financial future for decades. These investments were not always direct. Often, they would be managed through trusted bankers or stockbrokers, men who understood the intricacies of the nascent financial markets, navigating the ebb and flow of industrial speculation. Then there was the allure, and indeed the palpable risk, of colonial ventures. The British Empire, at this time, was a colossal entity, its tendrils reaching across oceans to distant lands. These territories, often rich in natural resources and offering new markets, presented irresistible opportunities for profit. Investments might be made in trading companies, such as the East India Company, which was a behemoth, its ships plying the waters between Britain and the Indian subcontinent, laden with spices, tea, and textiles. Owning shares in such an enterprise was not merely a financial endeavor, it was an investment in a grand, sometimes brutal, imperial design. The dividends, when they arrived, were often substantial, reflecting the immense profits generated from global trade, from the exploitation of resources, and from the sophisticated networks of commerce that spanned half the world. Beyond companies, there were also investments in plantations, particularly in the West Indies, where fortunes were built on the cultivation of sugar, tobacco, and coffee. These were often managed through agents, with the profits flowing back to absentee landlords in Britain. This aspect of wealth management, while undeniably generating immense riches, is viewed through a different lens in our contemporary understanding, carrying with it the heavy historical baggage of exploitation and human suffering. These colonial investments required significant capital outlay, for land, for labor, for transport, but the potential returns were so vast that many were willing to undertake the risk, propelled by the promise of exotic commodities and ever-increasing wealth. Another crucial aspect of financial management involved the careful stewardship of existing capital. Rather than merely spending, the wealthy would often lend money, either to individuals or to various enterprises, in exchange for interest. Government bonds, for instance, offered a relatively safe harbor for capital, providing a steady, if modest, return. These were effectively loans to the state, supporting its various endeavors, from infrastructure projects to military campaigns. Imagine the comforting regularity of interest payments arriving, a dependable stream of income that required little active management, allowing the owner to pursue other interests or simply savor their leisure. The financial landscape of 2 centuries ago, while lacking the instantaneity of today's digital markets, was sophisticated in its own right. It was a world of handwritten checks, promissory notes, and bills of exchange, of trusted family lawyers and diligent accountants. Wealth was not merely accumulated, it was actively managed, protected from downturns, and strategically deployed for growth. The patriarch of a wealthy family would often devote considerable portions of his time to these matters, understanding that the preservation and growth of his family's fortune was a solemn responsibility, ensuring the continued comfort and standing of generations yet to come. This careful husbandry of resources extended to the construction of grand estates, the patronage of the arts, and the elegant maintenance of a particular lifestyle. The fortunes, painstakingly managed through land rents, daring industrial investments, and often ethically complex colonial ventures, provided the silent, sturdy scaffolding upon which the visible splendor of their lives was built. It was a world where wealth management was not just a pursuit of profit, but a fundamental element of lineage, prestige, and the perpetuation of a distinct social order. As we contemplate this intricate financial ecosystem, let us gently transition into the next aspect of their lives, holding on to the quiet understanding of the careful calculations that underlay their world. Tonight, we drift back to a time when great wealth, though it certainly brought comforts unknown to most, also carried a very specific tapestry of duties and expectations. So, as you settle in, perhaps dimming the lights and finding a truly peaceful position, let us ease into this quiet exploration. And should you find our journey together a calming one, a gentle tap of the like button, or a soft subscription, would always be appreciated. In the elegant drawing rooms and hushed libraries 2 centuries past, the conversation around immense fortunes was rarely solely about acquisition. Rather, it frequently turned to the weighty issue of obligation. To be truly and enduringly rich in the early 19th century was to be, in many ways, a guardian of societal well-being, whether this guardianship was embraced with genuine fervor or merely performed with a meticulous eye toward public perception. The concept of noblesse oblige, the unspoken, yet profoundly felt, conviction that privilege entailed responsibility, was not an abstract ideal, but a tangible pressure, a quiet hum beneath the surface of glittering balls and grand country estates. Religious convictions often played a profoundly significant role in shaping these philanthropic impulses. For many of the era's affluent, particularly those adhering to various Protestant denominations such as the Quakers, Methodists, or even more traditional Anglicans, the scriptures offered clear directives regarding the care of the poor, the widowed, and the orphaned. Passages speaking of rendering unto Caesar what was Caesar's and unto God what was God's, or the parable of the rich young ruler, resonated deeply, fostering a sense of divine stewardship. Wealth was not seen simply as personal accumulation, but as a temporary gift, entrusted by a higher power, for which one would ultimately be held accountable. This belief often translated into tangible acts of charity, woven into the very fabric of affluent lives. Consider, for example, the establishment of hospitals. The idea of public healthcare as we know it today was non-existent. Instead, infirmaries and dispensaries, often rudimentary but utterly vital, were primarily funded through the largesse of the wealthy. Their names would grace the cornerstone, their portraits might hang in the main hall, but more importantly, their regular subscriptions kept these institutions afloat, providing succor to those who could not afford a physician's visit or even a simple tonic. These were not mere acts of social climbing; for many, they were deeply personal commitments, born of a genuine desire to alleviate suffering, often framed within a religious understanding of Christian duty. Education, too, was a fertile ground for philanthropic endeavor. While universities were ancient institutions, accessible only to the elite, the growing demand for basic literacy and vocational skills for the burgeoning working classes spurred the establishment of numerous ragged schools and Sunday schools. Wealthy benefactors would contribute sums, sometimes quite substantial, to purchase land, erect schoolhouses, and pay the meager salaries of teachers. This was often driven by a sense of moral upliftment, a belief that education could civilize the poor, instill good habits, and ultimately reduce crime and social unrest. It was a paternalistic view, certainly, but one that undeniably improved the prospects of countless children who would otherwise have remained entirely unlettered. The sheer scale of poverty in industrializing societies was, of course, stark and undeniable. Workhouses existed, and their harsh realities were well known, but private charity often sought to mitigate these worst excesses. Soup kitchens, coal funds, and clothing distributions were common sights in urban centers, frequently organized and funded by affluent women, who, while often excluded from formal business or politics, found a powerful sphere of influence and agency in charitable work. They would form committees, host fundraising teas, and personally visit the homes of the poor, a practice known as district visiting, distributing aid and, often, moral instruction. This direct engagement, sometimes criticized as intrusive, was nonetheless a primary artery through which relief flowed to a struggling populace. Beyond these more practical concerns, there was also a patronage of the arts and sciences. While perhaps not direct charity, the funding of expeditions, the commissioning of portraits and sculptures, the purchase of vast libraries, and the endowment of scientific societies all contributed to the cultural and intellectual wealth of the nation. These acts, though they certainly elevated the patron's own status, also created opportunities for artists, scholars, and scientists, preserving knowledge and fostering new discoveries. It was an investment in culture, a recognition that a truly great society needed more than just commerce, it needed beauty and understanding. And then, there was the undeniable element of public image. While genuine conviction was a powerful driver for many, the gaze of society was always present. A prominent family, known for its vast wealth but conspicuously absent from charitable endeavors, would have found itself subject to quiet disapprobation, a subtle chill in social interactions. Reputation was paramount, a delicate construct that could be bolstered by acts of generosity or tarnished by perceived selfishness. Donating to a local orphanage, endowing a new wing of a hospital, or sponsoring a public park was not merely an act of beneficence, it was also a strategic assertion of one's standing, a visible demonstration of one's position as a pillar of the community. The very landscape of towns and cities bore testament to this. Parks were often gifted by wealthy families, their names carved into monumental gates. Almshouses, providing sheltered accommodation for the elderly or infirm, frequently carried the name of their founder. Libraries, museums, and even water fountains were often the direct result of private philanthropy. These were not government initiatives, they were expressions of individual wealth, channeled into civic improvement, becoming a permanent legacy, a silent testament to the responsibilities that came with great fortune. So, the truly rich of 2 centuries ago lived within a complex web of privilege and pressure. Their wealth afforded them luxuries beyond imagining, but it also placed upon them a social covenant, a tacit agreement that a portion of their bounty would be returned to the community. Whether driven by deep religious conviction, a genuine sense of human empathy, or the shrewd calculation of maintaining social standing, philanthropy was an intrinsic, often expected, aspect of their existence, shaping not only their lives but the very fabric of the society around them. It was a quiet acknowledgement that with immense power and abundance, came indeed, a great responsibility. Tonight, as the gentle quiet of the evening settles around us, we drift back to a time long past, a time when the world was illuminated by oil lamps and gaslight, and the sounds of bustling cities were still tempered by the quietude of horse-drawn carriages. We prepare ourselves now to explore the intricate tapestry of a bygone era, allowing our thoughts to soften and our minds to find a soothing rhythm. Perhaps, if this quiet journey brings you a sense of calm and gentle understanding, you might consider offering a soft gesture of appreciation later. So, if you are comfortable, with your lighting dimmed, let us begin our tranquil voyage into history's embrace. We have traversed through the gilded drawing rooms, marveled at the intricate lacework and shimmering silks, and savored descriptions of meticulously prepared banquets, rich with imported spices and exotic fruits. We have walked through vast estates, where every tree was a testament to inherited wealth and every fountain a symbol of cultivated taste. Yet, for all these glittering facets of privilege, these opulent realities were but one side of a dramatically divided coin, for beyond the wrought iron gates and polished oak doors, a profoundly different existence unfolded, a testament to the era's often brutal disparities. The prosperity we have so carefully observed was, for a vast majority, an unattainable dream, an almost unimaginable fantasy. While the wealthy dined on exquisitely roasted game and delicate pastries, the streets beyond their manicured gardens teemed with an entirely different kind of hunger, a gnawing, persistent emptiness that etched itself onto the faces of countless men, women, and often, tragically, children. These individuals, forming the bedrock of society, were often engaged in physical, relentless labor, their days stretching from before dawn until long after dusk, for wages that barely offered a foothold against the encroaching tide of destitution. Imagine, for a moment, the pungent air of industrial cities, thick with the smoke from countless factory chimneys, casting a perpetual, gray pallor over the meager homes clustered together in narrow, congested alleys. These were not the spacious, well-appointed townhouses of the gentry, but rather small, often single rooms, shared by entire families, where privacy was a luxury rarely afforded and personal space an unthinkable extravagance. The walls might be damp, the windows small and grimy, offering little protection against the biting winter winds or the oppressive summer heat. Simple wooden furniture, often rickety and worn, might be the sum total of their possessions, a stark contrast to the richly carved mahogany and velvet upholstery we have previously envisioned. The food on their tables, when there was food at all, was a stark testament to their limited means. Gone were the multiple courses and delicate sauces, in their place, one would find plain, often monotonous fare. Gruel, made from oats or barley, might form the staple of their diet, perhaps a piece of dark, coarse bread, and on truly fortunate occasions, a small portion of cheap, tough meat, or a few vegetables, often withered and bruised. Malnutrition was not a vague concept but a tangible, daily reality, weakening bodies, dulling minds, and making them susceptible to the myriad diseases that thrived in unsanitary conditions. Indeed, sanitation itself was a luxury. While the grander homes might boast rudimentary indoor plumbing or at least dedicated facilities for waste, the burgeoning urban centers often lacked adequate infrastructure for the vast majority of their inhabitants. Open sewers might run through the crowded streets, turning them into breeding grounds for illness. Clean water, too, was often scarce and contaminated, forcing families to rely on questionable sources, further exacerbating health crises. Epidemics, such as cholera and typhoid, swept through these working-class districts with terrifying regularity, claiming lives indiscriminately, leaving behind a trail of grief and further hardship. Child labor, though often jarring to our modern sensibilities, was a grim necessity for many families struggling to survive. Young hands, sometimes as young as 6 or 7, toiled in factories, mines, or as chimney sweeps, enduring long hours, dangerous conditions, and often meager, almost symbolic, pay. Their small stature and nimble fingers were exploited for tasks deemed too difficult or dangerous for adults, robbing them of their childhoods and condemning them to a life of early toil, their small faces often smudged with soot or dust, reflecting a weariness far beyond their tender years. Education, for the vast majority, was a distant and often unattainable aspiration. While the children of the wealthy were tutored in classics, languages, and fine arts, learning to navigate the intricate social codes of their class, the children of the poor were thrust into the workforce, their schooling often limited to a few years, if any at all. Literacy rates were significantly lower among the working classes, creating a profound intellectual chasm that further entrenched social immobility. The world of books, of scientific discovery, and philosophical discourse, remained largely outside their grasp, accessible only to those fortunate enough to possess both the leisure and the means for such pursuits. This stark contrast was not merely economic, it shaped every aspect of life, from the food on the table to the clothes on one's back, from the quality of healthcare to the very air one breathed. The wealthy lived in a world of cushioned comfort and cultivated refinement, while the poor navigated a landscape of relentless struggle and pervasive uncertainty. This wasn't just a difference in income, it was a fundamental divergence in life chances, in dignity, and in hope itself, creating a societal chasm that would, in time, fuel profound social and political changes, slowly shifting the very foundations of the world we are so thoughtfully exploring tonight. The soft hum of this realization now settles around us, as we continue our calm drift into the echoes of the past. Tonight, as the soft glow of your evening lamp casts long, gentle shadows, we shall continue our tranquil journey into a time long past. We drift back to an era where opulence painted the grandest of canvases, yet even amidst such splendor, quiet undercurrents of unease flowed. You may wish to dim your lights a little further, perhaps find a soft blanket to wrap around, and simply allow your mind to unfurl gently, listening to these echoes from 2 centuries ago. Should you find a quiet peace in these narratives, a soft whisper of appreciation for our shared history is always a welcome gesture. Our focus this evening, in this particular chapter of our exploration, turns to the less burnished facets of wealth, to the subtle anxieties and persistent pressures that often accompanied the grandest fortunes of 2 centuries past. While we have luxuriated in tales of magnificent estates, exquisite gowns, and lavish dinners, it is also true that the very highest echelons of society, those who possessed immense riches, were often burdened by concerns that were unique to their elevated station. These were not the common worries of daily sustenance, nor the pressing anxieties of the aspiring merchant, rather, they were intricately woven into the very fabric of their privileged existence. One of the most profound and ever-present anxieties for the wealthy of this period revolved around the delicate matter of inheritance. The accumulation of vast wealth, whether through generations of careful stewardship, shrewd investment, or fortuitous enterprise, was not merely a personal achievement, it was a sacred trust, a legacy to be carefully preserved and judiciously passed down. The responsibility of ensuring that the family fortune remained intact, and ideally, expanded, through the successive generations, weighed heavily on the shoulders of patriarchs and matriarchs alike. Consider, if you will, the intricacies involved. Wills were not simple documents outlining a division of assets. They were often sprawling, complex legal masterpieces, crafted by the finest solicitors, designed to protect entails, establish trusts, and prevent fragmentation of large estates. The fear of a spendthrift heir, an improvident son who might squander away decades or even centuries of accumulated wealth, was a genuine and pervasive trepidation. Stories abounded, whispered behind gloved hands in drawing rooms, of once great families whose fortunes had dissipated through gambling debts, unwise investments, or simply a lack of fiscal discipline. To be the generation responsible for the decline of a family's financial standing, to be the one to betray the painstaking efforts of one's ancestors, was a profound and deeply felt social disgrace. Then there was the question of reputation. In an era where social standing was paramount, and where wealth often dictated one's position in the intricately stratified social hierarchy, a family's reputation was as valuable, if not more so, than their gold and silver. A tarnished reputation could diminish one's influence, close doors to advantageous marriage alliances, and even, in extreme cases, lead to a slow and agonizing social ostracization. Scandals, whether financial transgressions, moral indiscretions, or anything that hinted at a lack of propriety, were deeply damaging. The wealthy lived under a constant, albeit often unspoken, scrutiny. Their every action, every public utterance, every association, was observed, judged, and discussed. For women of wealth, their reputation was inextricably linked to their family's honor and their own prospects for a suitable marriage. A young lady from a prominent family, even with a substantial dowry, could find her marriageability severely impacted by even the slightest hint of impropriety or a whisper of an unsuitable connection. For men, while they enjoyed somewhat more latitude, a notorious reputation could still make it difficult to secure advantageous business partnerships, political appointments, or even a respectful place in exclusive clubs and societies. The pressure to maintain an impeccable public image, to embody the virtues of dignity, integrity, and good taste, was a relentless undercurrent in their luxurious lives. Beyond these immediate concerns, there were the subtle, yet pervasive, pressures of maintaining status. Wealth was not a static entity, it required constant vigilance, shrewd management, and often, considerable expenditure, simply to keep up appearances. The grand estates we have admired, with their extensive grounds and meticulously maintained interiors, demanded a substantial retinue of servants, gardeners, stable hands, and household staff. Their upkeep alone represented an ongoing financial commitment, a constant drain on resources that, while vast, were not inexhaustible. Consider the expectations surrounding social engagements. To host a proper dinner party, with multiple courses, fine wines, and attentive service, involved significant expense. To attend balls and soirees meant purchasing exquisite gowns and impeccably tailored suits, often sourced from the finest modistes and tailors in London or Paris. The maintenance of one's stables, the acquisition of fashionable carriages, and the occasional grand tour of Europe were not mere indulgences for the very rich, they were, in many ways, necessities, demonstrations of their continued ability to live up to the expectations of their peer group. Slipping in these external markers of wealth, appearing to be less opulent than one's contemporaries, could be interpreted as a sign of financial strain, leading to a subtle, yet undeniable, loss of social currency. There was also the pressure to contribute to philanthropic endeavors and public works, a certain expectation that those who had been blessed with immense fortune would, in turn, contribute to the betterment of society. This might involve endowing hospitals, supporting educational institutions, or contributing to the arts. While often driven by genuine altruism, it was also, at times, a social obligation, another aspect of maintaining one's honorable standing within the community. Not to contribute, not to engage in such benefactions, could be seen as parsimonious or, worse, uncaring, further undermining one's reputation. So, while the glittering drawing rooms and verdant parklands of 2 centuries ago might seem, at first glance, to represent a life free from quotidian worries, we see that beneath the polished veneer of privilege, a different set of anxieties quietly simmered. The weight of inheritance, the delicate balancing act of reputation, and the relentless demands of maintaining one's esteemed status, each contributed to a unique form of pressure, a shadow that often accompanied even the brightest of fortunes. These were the less visible costs of profound wealth, the subtle burdens borne by those who resided at the very pinnacle of society. As our narrative for this evening softly draws to a close, perhaps you might feel a gentle appreciation for the quiet complexities of history, for the understanding that even amidst great prosperity, human hearts carried their own specific strains and concerns. You are now invited to simply breathe, softly and evenly, as you transition into your own tranquil slumber. Tonight, we reflect softly on the currents of time, considering how the very essence of what it meant to be considered rich has gently unfurled and transformed over the past 2 centuries. So, allow yourself to sink a little deeper into comfort, perhaps dimming the ambient light around you, and simply listen to the quiet murmur of history. If, as our journey concludes tonight, you find a sense of peace and curiosity has been stirred, a gentle like or a quiet subscription would always be appreciated. As we cast our gaze back to those elegant days of 2 centuries past, the landscape of wealth emerges with distinct contours, quite different from the sprawling, interconnected tapestry we understand today. The rich of that era, the affluent families whose fortunes we have gently explored, built their empires upon foundations that feel, in some ways, both distant and yet curiously familiar. Their wealth was often deeply rooted in tangible assets of exceptional scale, vast agricultural land stretching to the horizon, grand country estates with countless rooms and meticulously sculpted gardens, bustling factories churning out textiles or precision-crafted goods, and the ownership of ships that plied the global seas, carrying spices and silks. Money, in its most liquid form perhaps, was less about constantly flowing digital transactions and more about physical gold and vaults, and the substantial, often inherited, capital invested in these very real, very present enterprises. The nature of their power, too, flowed from these tangible roots. To be rich then meant to hold immense social standing, a position often cemented by generations of landownership and influence within local communities, and certainly within the wider political sphere. Their opulence was not merely a display of personal comfort but a powerful statement of their family's enduring legacy and their unshakable place at the apex of society. This manifest power, a heavy mantle worn with both pride and a certain expectation, allowed them to shape laws, influence trade routes, and even dictate the very aesthetics and cultural trends of their age. The wealthy were the patrons of art and science, the benefactors of public works, and the arbiters of taste, with a scope of influence that extended far beyond their private chambers. Contrast this, if you will, with the nuanced shades of wealth in our contemporary world. While significant ownership of assets remains a hallmark of affluence, the nature of these assets has broadened immensely, shifting perhaps from the strictly tangible towards the increasingly intangible. Today's fortunes are often built upon rapid innovation in technology, intricate financial instruments, global intellectual property, and the vast, intricate networks of information that characterize our digital age. A vast expanse of physical land might be less important than a breakthrough algorithm or a globally recognized brand. The speed at which wealth can be accumulated and, indeed, dispersed, has accelerated dramatically, a stark departure from the more gradual, often generational accumulation prevalent 2 centuries ago. Moreover, the pathways to acquiring riches have diversified considerably. While inheritance and established noble lineage were significant doors to prosperity in the past, today's wealthy class often includes a vibrant cohort of self-made individuals, entrepreneurs who have navigated entirely new industries and created their own opportunities, often from relatively humble beginnings. This shift has, to some extent, democratized the potential for wealth accumulation, even if significant disparities persist. The journey from modest origins to immense wealth, though still challenging, is far more plausible today than it ever was in the rigid social structures of 2 centuries past. Yet, despite these undeniable shifts in the very bedrock of wealth creation and manifestation, certain enduring threads of the rich experience continue to resonate with an almost ancient familiarity, connecting those grand lives of the past with the powerful lives of the present. The concept of luxury, for instance, remains a perpetual beacon for the affluent, though its expressions have certainly evolved. 2 centuries ago, luxury was largely defined by bespoke craftsmanship, rare materials sourced from distant lands, the sheer scale of one's estate, and the vast retinue of servants who maintained it all. The finest silks, the purest crystal, the most exquisite furniture, all handcrafted by master artisans, spoke volumes. Today, a different kind of rarefied luxury often coexists or even supplants these older forms. While fine craftsmanship endures, it is often intertwined with cutting-edge technology, personalized experiences that defy mass production, unparalleled access to exclusive events, and the ultimate luxury of time, carefully curated and meticulously managed by a dedicated support system. A private jet now transports one across continents with vastly more speed and privacy than the finest carriage could ever offer, though the underlying desire for seamless, personalized movement remains constant. Privacy, too, holds a similar, persistent value. 2 centuries ago, the rich enjoyed a certain measure of privacy simply by virtue of their substantial estates, enclosed by high walls and dense woodlands, buffered by distance and a respectful, oft-feared, societal deference. Their lives, while influential, were often lived within a more insulated sphere. Today, in an era of ubiquitous digital connection and constant surveillance, true privacy has become an even rarer commodity, often meticulously safeguarded through advanced security measures and legal protections, transforming it into a highly sought-after, almost ultimate, luxury for those who can afford it. The desire to retreat from omnipresent scrutiny, to maintain a private sanctuary, remains a powerful impulse, echoing through the centuries. And then there is the enduring allure of influence and legacy. While the methods of exerting influence have certainly changed, from direct political appointments to strategic philanthropy, from land ownership to global media empires, the fundamental desire to shape the world according to one's vision, to leave an indelible mark, remains a critical aspect of being rich. The wealthy of both eras have sought to establish institutions, build foundations, and support causes that reflect their values and aspirations, ensuring their impact extends beyond their own lifetime. The names of grand families from 2 centuries ago are still etched in the endowments of universities and cultural institutions, just as the names of today's philanthropists adorn newly constructed hospitals and innovative research centers. This deep human yearning to transcend one's temporal existence through enduring contributions, to see one's vision manifest in the world, is a powerful, unifying thread connecting the rich of yesterday and today. Ultimately, while the trappings of wealth have transformed, reflecting the evolving technological and social landscapes, the core human desires perhaps remain surprisingly constant. The longing for comfort, for beauty, for security, for influence, and for a meaningful legacy, seems to transcend the mere passage of years. We carry echoes of those grand lives and their aspirations within our own contemporary dreams, finding a quiet familiarity in the enduring human quest for something more, something lasting, something abundant. And so, as our journey through the annals of yesterday's wealth draws to a gentle close, we leave you to ponder these subtle reflections, to let them settle softly into your thoughts as you drift further into the peaceful slumber that awaits.